Some of them will be opinion rather than expertise, I'm sure. So let's go.
So I was going to say, one of them is, you know, as a designer, there is a genuine concern at the moment with many designers because it's kind of it's very unknown, and of course, no one really knows the answer. But if I were a designer now, and what do you think something that you would be pursuing or looking into to make yourself a bit more future proof going forward as a designer? Or maybe even if the role changes, whatever it's called, but making yourself future proof. Is it, I'm aware of some people going, oh, actually, I'm just going to be a PM because it's more, you might say, the soft skills. And therefore, it's less maybe on the hard skills that maybe an eng that would work on, and eng will leverage AI maybe more with Copilot and so forth. Or do you think, no, actually, it's about, well, I'll leave it open, but what could help future proof yourself as a designer?
It's a tricky one because it's changing so rapidly. But I think at least I'd come back to the things we've been talking about that don't change as rapidly, which is human behavior and cognition, and understanding people, understanding how people try and use things, how people think about how they use things. So working in that space of user research, of sort of like understanding how people are going to interact with something and bringing that into kind of the building of interfaces. So as we've just described, like, right now I can describe an interface and it can get built for me, but it might work, right? And it might also be just enough. It might be, just enough for what needs to get done. So that element of like the sweating the craft in sort of pursuit of the craft itself feels like it's shaky, right? So it feels like some of that has, because, and this is by no means an original thought, and there are many, many posts on LinkedIn and thought leaders talking about all of this. So adding to the noise on this a little bit, but I think the degree to which we have mechanized our approach to interface design has helped us mechanize the creation of interfaces, right?
Yeah.
So, and that is wonderful in some ways. It means, maybe you can spend more time with users thinking about what users need to get done, and then bringing that back to your little robot pal and working on 3 different prototypes for that in the time it would have taken you to sweat over the wireframes of one to get it back into testing to get further, or to try something weirder, or to try something that excites you and is risky. Like, so there's a positive spin on that, I think, that hopefully we can sort of take the steps to sort of make happen. But I think it is, it is very disconcerting to see sort of like things that you sort of thought were the bedrock of what you did, sort of just be done to an incredible quality and at incredible speed, often, increasingly. But then the other part of what you do is still a huge part, like understanding how people interact with things and how you can create things that help them. It's a huge part of what being a designer is, in any medium. As you say, design has to work. It has to, my favorite definition of, everybody hates to have one definition of design, but I always love the Charles and Reims triplet of designers. Design is doing the best for the most with the least. That always felt good to me as a sort of working sort of definition. And so doing the best for the most with the least might be the least time making wireframes, great. You can do the best for the most by talking to more people, hanging out with users more, trying weirder things, going and talking to engineers about the cutting edge thing that they think is a huge risk, but they're really obsessed with. But if they could make it a prototype, then maybe they could convince the VP to put some resources into it.
Yeah.
Maybe you've got that time now. So that's a sort of, that's a glass half full version of it, but I'm going to stick with it.
You're gonna stick with that one. Okay.
My glass is very empty, but no, I'm metaphorically, glass half full. Yeah,
Doing some
I'm all right. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting because in answering that question, so again, the question was to basically how could you future-proof yourself as a designer in this new world? And you
Can ever future-proof yourself, right? That's probably why we got into it, is because we were sort of curious about the future and kind of where things are going and how you might develop. So I think there's looking after yourself and your family and all the rest of it, and I hope people can do that. But I think in terms of future-proofing, I don't think there's such a thing. I think there's like continuing to be curious and exploratory and sort of figuring out what is at the core of what we offer, which my bias, as I say, is towards thinking about interaction and thinking about cognition, and the, material and cognition are interface literally through their interactions. A very highfalutin way of looking at it. But in both of those, the material is changing all the time, rapidly. Cognition, not so rapidly. As we know, human beings not great at changing how they think over millennia, but often, we can be surprised. So there's that sort of cognition side of it feels like the more, if not future-proofed, it changes slower and it's a richer territory to kind of invest your time and skills in, perhaps, than getting ever better at making rounded rectangles.
Yeah. And you kind of, when you were talking, that last bit you said is effectively what you're saying, because you're saying, oh, now you can spend more time with users. Now you can spend time with the engineers and explore like potential products or weird things that you never had time for before.
I mean, say weird things is, it might not be that weird, but like if perhaps you haven't got more time, Lord knows, no one's ever asking you to spend longer on anything. But in that time, you might be able to make 3 things instead of 1 thing. So one of those things might be a risk or a bet or an oddball thing. It's not as risky or annoying to your colleagues to do that anymore. So that's where the glass half full for me is sort of that sort of potential.
Yeah. And it sounds like the designer just will be doing more things. Like you may be potentially, you could have still, that most people would say, oh, we're going to have less designers, but they're ultimately going to be doing more. And you kind of alluded to that, saying that you would do more hands-on with the UXR. You maybe because of the vibe coding, you could potentially start building things and so on. So do you feel like in terms of going forward, actually, you're going to be, I don't know about saying this, but like a master of none sort of thing where you're doing multiple things scenario?
Optimistic about it. The glass half empty version of it, as you say, like capital's going to capital, right? Like so if it can do more with less, it generally does. So I don't want to pretend that it's all rosy, but there's opportunity in some of these things. I think there's also, coming back to your question about what are the things that people overlook or don't think about perhaps as deeply as I do sometimes in sort of the middle of the night, is what's actually happening in the mechanics of these generative AI agents and engines. Also is and Brian Eno talks a lot about this, is that the amount of effort right now that you have to do to push these things away from the mean and the average and the usual is both why they're very welcomed by business. Is like you can get to average incredibly quickly, right? But it's very, very hard to get to extraordinary with some of these things. and you have to put a lot of effort into prompting them and cajoling them to do anything unexpected or risky or sort of beyond the mean, because literally they are sort of like averaging over, you know, the sum of everything that they've learned to kind of deliver you something that is going to successfully satisfy your needs. So that again for me is like an interesting place for where does the design team come in? Where does designers come in? Is that sort of like pushing those systems, or like pushing the outcomes of those systems? Again, like coming back to, if you've got the time, if in the time that you have, you can make 3 things instead of 1 thing, that means that you can then bring in that human element of the unexpected, or the risky, or the sort of the new, into that envelope that probably wasn't there before. But yeah, I think there's lots to be critical of. There's lots to be concerned about. There's lots to be wary of. Particularly, designers are not known for being able to separate their worth and identity from what they do. So it is kind of quite psychically perturbing sometimes to see what these systems can do, and how they do it so quickly. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of change. There's going to be a lot of disruption. I think there is going to be kind of people moving around, moving where they see they can deliver their value around from the orthodoxy of what we have right now as sort of design UX product teams. But that orthodoxy isn't that old, right? It's kind of only about 10-ish years old. Like, I've been doing this for 30 years, and, this sort of orthodoxy of working on UX, UI, working in product in a certain way, it's not old. It's very new. It's only about the last decade of sort of mega companies, mega uptick in tech, large teams, large surface areas to work on. It's going to change again. It's going to change probably in terms of the balance of like how many people are doing what where, certainly.
Yeah.
And some of that is going to be rough. But some of it is going to, a lot of it is also going to be where I think the things that are our core, we're curious about and good at, start to play in and sort of morph into something new.